I was very lucky working at Cologne, where the Hochschule had its own electronic music studio, and it had a couple of very, very good people working there, and 3 technicians who would run around at your bidding to do anything you like. Like, I want a piece of tape cut. We're just going to cut this piece, and I'm going to get a pair of scissors and cut it. And they would hold the tape for me. I would go cut. And so, what did you do that for? You better splice it together again. Now you won't get that. I said, that is exactly what we want. We want the music suddenly to stop. And we physically cut tape. What I had learnt from Douglas Lilburn in 1970, when I worked with him for 6 months in the studio at Victoria, I had basically learnt how to splice tape. And he'd shown me how to get noise onto tape and how to take what you want and whatever proportion you wanted and to splice it together, and then on only 2 channels to be able to play 2 of these together so that one had a certain complexity. And I had done basically just tape splicing. He played me a little piece when I came back to New Zealand and said, there you are, that's your first piece. Your second piece is very, very different. And this was this poor little, kind of 1-minute piece with all this hard work that had gone into making all the different sounds. And I had certainly learned what he had to teach himself on first working with tape recorders and tape. So having learnt that, I'd always been aware of his limitations and why his music, all of his music, was so limited. Having come back from Germany, where I'd been working with the little synthesizers, they were just called Synthy something and Synthy something else. And he'd acquired one here, and he'd made a whole piece of music, which I was absolutely horrified at. It was so simplistic out of the noises that the little Synthy made when it was turned on. And if you sort of turned a switch, it would go, and if you turned it the other way, go, and it was so simplistic. And he made a piece of music out of all this, which was, the absolutely basest, most ignorant way of using the machine that you could have. And coming from a place where we'd been using them in a much more sophisticated manner, I was horrified just to hear this, and that it was taken seriously, and people still love this piece, which you probably recognise. But it was all part of being a pioneer. He was the pioneer in New Zealand, and he did an amazing job, because he actually did discover how to splice tape and then how to make bibbs and making music as he went. So what I had in Cologne was something totally the other end. I had state-of-the-art machinery, state-of-the-art people to work with who could help me find anything I wanted, but who also took over the job of the physical creation of the sound. So as a result, probably in this work, there's a huge amount of sound that didn't need to be there, but it was very interesting in that the verbal aspect of everything that I do was to the fore. And I had half a dozen people, they were all my friends from the Stockhausen class, who incidentally were all foreigners. There was only, in all my time there was only one German student who went to Stockhausen, who was Wolfgang Riem, who's now quite well known. And he was the only German who went there. Whether or not this was a sign that I should have noted that you weren't going to get very much out of your Stockhausen class on your own composition. You are going to get a whole lot about his world and absolutely fascinating ideas, but very little about your own work. So maybe the Germans knew that that was going to happen, but for us it was a fascinating time. And in the studio, Therefore, I was working on some of the ideas that I've been thinking about in his classes, but particularly verbal things, aspects of being a New Zealander in a foreign country, in a foreign speaking country, aspects of our speech and our ways of pronouncing words, which were different from everybody else. I became fascinated by how a vowel sound would change depending on what country you came from, and you're trying the same word and yet it all sounds different because you have different formats that you're making in your mouth. And I looked at these qualities of vowel sounds and the changes to them through this very different set of students, and everybody having different ways of speaking, some Americans, some Australians, some New Zealanders, and so on, and cut the vowel sounds out of the words that they produced on this long recording session. We had one recording session that went on with a lot of laughter and a lot of strange speech and people pretending to be different nationalities. How would an American say something, German word, the way a Norwegian would? And these attempts at changing vowels, some crass, some very sophisticated. And these vowel sounds got put together to make complexes of sounds. And the piece in 5 sections had A, E, I, O, and U as their background sounds, and they used words layered upon the top of that used these vowel sounds, used with different national slants into the vowel sounds. And another layer on top of that was the actual stories or phrases, sentences, ideas that had been spoken during it. So we had this layer upon layer of vowel sound background, cut out vowels, cut out words, and then the stories that were the origination of all of this. But you can hear, if you listen to this, you actually can hear, though I'd been splicing vowel sounds out, because we had no other way of doing it, splice it and then put those together and make a loop, so that the loop goes on. And of course there's a little bit of flutter because the voice as it speaks has never got a single pitch, that's always changing slightly. So there's this sort of ziggy kind of very fidgety kind of sound, a very electric kind of sound behind everything, because these vowel sounds, which are the only musical aspect to it, are these spoken sounds, creating this oh, I don't know, I just fidget every time I think of it. During the making of this, there was a lot of laughter. And a lot of suppressed laughter, because the students that I was working with, they thought they weren't meant to be making any other noises apart from vowel sounds, but I wanted all the laughter sounds as well. So I picked out all the laughter sounds from very small little single sounds into quite extended sections of laughter, and started making laughter which went round and round in circles and in complexes and grew larger and larger and started controlling various different processes until it kind of pretty much exploded through into the next section. And that's the section that we heard in the concert. It was something which we learnt to do. It was one of the specific things that I learnt in my course there, was how to make a score of an electronic tape. Now, I tried to make a score first and then slot the pieces in, but most people made noises and then scored them according to seconds. It is a score which went on for however many minutes there are in the piece, and each section had a certain number of minutes, and there were a certain number of pitch levels, and I had various wiggles and colours and things which were making the sounds on the tape. And then these were related to instructions underneath, which had the process that had been followed. And I was working on 16 tracks in Germany rather than 2 tracks in New Zealand. So it was rather good. And so following these 16 tracks through and describing in some way what process had been made from vocal to electronic sound was, well, it began with complexity and it ended up being pure gesture.